It's refreshing to think she won't be around for a while. My youngest brother was getting married, and I was busy preparing for an overnight stay. I even took paid time off to leave our home, where I live with my in-laws. It's been a while since I've done that. I was gathering my overnight bag to join the celebration. Then I heard my mother-in-law's voice chasing after me from behind. Never come back. And while you're at it, why don't you just get a divorce and leave? Sure, as you wish. I responded calmly and accepted her spite with a quiet smile. Leaving her sneering taunts behind, I stepped out of the house. Before I got too far, I said goodbye toward our home. Thank you for everything, it's been a long time. I don't recall ever being looked after by my mother-in-law, though. Somehow, I feel very lighthearted. I pulled along a slightly oversized suitcase, rushing to the place where my beloved family awaited. I'll be staying at the hotel for 2 nights and 3 days. What comes after that remains a secret. My mother-in-law doesn't yet know the fact that I will never return as a resident of this house. I'm Margaret Johnson, a 48-year-old part-timer. While working at an office, I also manage our busy household. My husband, Austin, and I are the same age, and our marriage has lasted over 30 years. It was an arranged meeting recommended by an acquaintance, but we're a couple who share similar values and get along well. The only loneliness comes from Austin's job as a sailor. He works for a shipping company and can be away from home for over a year at times. Still, our relationship is good, and we are blessed with a son. We live in a house, cohabiting with my in-laws. Until recently, I was primarily responsible for caring for my husband's grandmother, who lived with us. I used my income to hire a caregiver during the day. After that, I took care of her mostly by myself. This arrangement continued until my grandmother-in-law passed away. Margaret, thank you for everything over the years. Grandma must have been happy, too. She was grateful to you until the end. Austin's kind words brought tears to my eyes. Surrounded by children to great-grandchildren, my grandmother-in-law was well cared for in her younger days. When I was young and unfamiliar with household tasks, it was she who taught me how to live properly from scratch. She was kind and fun. Though strict at times, she seemed to be laughing most of the time. Being able to keep my job from my younger days and work part-time even during caregiving was all thanks to her. Despite the caregiving being a significant burden all along, now that it's over, I find myself nostalgically cherishing those days. I never imagined that the environment around me would change so drastically right after that. Austin, due to his job on the ship, often has to be away from home for long periods. I'm proud of him for his indispensable work in American logistics, but living with my in-laws puts me at a disadvantage. The moment my grandmother-in-law passed away, my mother-in-law's attitude changed dramatically. Previously, she would try to appease me with sweet talk while dumping all the caregiving responsibilities on me. But as soon as the caregiving ended, she began to disregard me. When she went out, she would deliberately exclude me from the souvenirs. And when we passed each other in the house, she would bump into me on purpose. Her overtly hostile behavior was so shocking, I couldn't help but be surprised before feeling disgusted. Moreover, my son Nolan, who happened to be visiting, said something to me. Hey, Grandma started saying nasty things again. It's an old story, but when Nolan was just 4 or 5 years old, there was a significant incident with my mother-in-law. She filled Nolan with baseless accusations against me, and upset Nolan reported this to the whole family. Your mom is cheating, she's gonna leave you eventually. That woman is no good, she doesn't work, and she's all bad. Your dad hates her too, that's why he doesn't come home, you got that? I was shocked to learn she had been teaching him such lies. I wasn't cheating, and despite working every day and doing household chores, I was truly busy. Moreover, the reason Austin was absent was genuinely because of work. That's such a joke, it's ridiculous to take it seriously. Anyway, such a small kid won't understand anything. That's how my mother-in-law sulked, and my father-in-law was also furious about it. I was too busy comforting a saddened Nolan to care about anything else. Later, when Austin came home, I remember feeling relieved as he changed his demeanor and scolded my mother-in-law. Now, let's return to the present. Austin is currently away for work. Perhaps because of that, my mother-in-law seems to be taking full advantage. You'd think she'd have more free time now that the caregiving is over, but instead, she keeps me very busy. She frequently hands me complicated recipes to cook and takes this opportunity to demand a thorough cleaning. Just the other day, she invited the neighborhood ladies over, and they watched a marathon of dramas. I thought they were just enjoying themselves, but I ended up having to clean up the messy room full of snack wrappers and drink spills. Right during the busiest time before dinner, adding unnecessary work, I was understandably irritated. Really, you're such a drag. Aren't you done yet? Hurry up and get dinner ready. She'd say this while I was sweating from cleaning up, but come dinner time, she wouldn't even sit at the table, claiming she was full from the snacks. I was utterly exasperated when Nolan then complained to me. She says she doesn't like you, that you should disappear. I'm going back home, I feel sick. Wouldn't it be better if we lived separately from Grandma? I think Dad would understand too. I calmed down an upset Nolan and drove him to the station for his return trip. Of course, I couldn't let things continue like this. Soon, I'll need to have a serious talk with Austin. The day after Nolan left, I was troubled not by my mother-in-law, but by something else. Suddenly, I started feeling unwell. My limbs were cold, yet my face would suddenly heat up, and I'd break out in a sweat. It seems like today, my symptoms of menopause were particularly severe. I've been feeling oddly unwell since last year, and the doctors told me it's menopause. Right now, they're just watching how it goes, no medication yet, but some days can be tough. Maybe the stress from what I heard about my mother-in-law's behavior is getting to me. By evening, my condition worsened, and I was lying down in my room. Hey, what are you sleeping for? Dinner. I could hear my mother-in-law stomping towards me. I had such a headache that it was hard to even get up, let alone deal with her. I thought about pretending to be asleep, but she suddenly yanked off the blanket and I reluctantly sat up. Dinner. She clapped her hands as she demanded it. If it's dinner she wants, she should just make it herself. Why does she always expect me to do it, as if she's somebody special? Previously, my grandmother-in-law managed the kitchen, but lately, it's only been me cooking. My mother-in-law only steps into the kitchen when Austin is home, and even then, she barely does more than arrange the plates. Maybe she can't cook at all. I'm feeling unwell. I think it's menopause, but I really can't do the housework today. Please, can you make dinner today? I managed to squeeze out those words while feeling utterly lethargic. My mother-in-law had severe menopause symptoms herself. I had already moved in with them and had my fair share of her snapping at me, so there's no doubt about it. That's why I thought she'd understand the pain if I mentioned it was menopause. However, her reaction was the exact opposite of what I had hoped for. With a snort, she suddenly turned a bag over above my head. What? I let out a small scream as something showered down. In the dim room, just waking from sleep and feeling sick, I couldn't tell what it was at first. But a moment later, I realized it was the smell of potatoes. The bag she turned upside down was nearly empty of its snack contents. Though I realized she had sprinkled me with snack crumbs, the sheer unexpectedness of it left me dumbfounded for a moment. Don't be lazy! With a click of her tongue, she left the room. Here I was, bedridden and in pain, being yelled at and nearly feeling like clicking my tongue back. How could she do something like this? Rather than anger, it was a bizarre sensation, like seeing some rare animal. I felt sure that my limit was nearing. About half a year later, I had taken some paid leave from work and was preparing for a trip. It was for my youngest brother's wedding. He had been living with his girlfriend for a few years and they were finally tying the knot. Their home is in New York, and they wanted to have the wedding there. Since it's quite far from here, I booked a hotel for a 2-night, 3-day stay. I decided to take the trip and participate overnight. My younger brother offered to cover the hotel costs, but I declined. Since the date of the ceremony was set according to my schedule, I wanted to pay for it myself. It's a small ceremony with just the family, but it's a rare opportunity for all the relatives to gather, so I'm looking forward to it. Since nobody else would likely prepare meals in my absence, I decided to make a week's worth of meals in advance. The night before leaving, while we were eating dinner, I told my in-laws about the meals I prepared and stored in the fridge. My father-in-law thanked me. But as usual, my mother-in-law seemed displeased with everything about me. Making such a fuss about it, how presumptuous. Why are you even going to your brother's wedding? It's just a remarriage, isn't it? Probably nothing good. She frowned as she said this, and my father-in-law glared at her. Well, he's not someone who just stops at glaring. Actually, both my brother and his partner are marrying for the first time. I replied with a tilt of my head, and my mother-in-law burst out laughing with a vulgar expression. What was so funny? It seemed she had misunderstood something. First marriage at 40? Must be something seriously wrong with him to be single that long. Your brother's at a good age, yet he's having a flashy wedding? Shameless. She seemed to be confusing him with another brother, or perhaps she had completely forgotten about my family's structure. In fact, I have 3 brothers. The youngest brother and I have a 14-year age gap, so he's still quite young. No, it's my youngest brother who's getting married. He's in his early 30s, and his partner is in her 20s. I shrugged and explained, but my mother-in-law raised her eyebrows as if offended by the correction. However, she soon twisted her face into a sneer again. How creepy. His partner is 20? That's like a parent and child. I was astonished at her refusal to listen. This time, even my father-in-law seemed to realize the mistake, clearing his throat. I swallowed a sigh as I responded. It's not 20, she's in her 20s. I've heard they are only 4 or 5 years apart. Doesn't that sound like a parent and child to you? I talked to her over video call the other day, and she seemed like a very sensible young lady. I ended the conversation with my in-laws and started preparing to leave. At the venue, I should see Nolan and my parents as well. I packed a beautiful outfit for the ceremony into my suitcase and meticulously checked for anything I might have forgotten. From the living room, I could hear my mother-in-law loudly talking to my father-in-law. It will be refreshing to have her gone for a while. I felt the malice in her words on my back as I bit my lip. Getting angry now could provoke her to tamper with my carefully packed belongings. Better to endure until I leave the house. The next morning, I pulled my slightly large suitcase and headed to the front door. Never come back. And while you're at it, why don't you just get a divorce and leave? Her words momentarily stopped me. As I began walking towards the entrance again, I answered cheerfully. Yes, as you wish. My voice was calmer than I expected. Perhaps I'm more relieved by this situation than I realize. I had reached my limit of endurance long ago. Actually, I had been in touch with Austin beforehand, steadily preparing for this day. Just stop with the nonsense and really do it soon. My mother-in-law scoffed, munching on snacks and laughing early in the morning, seemingly unfazed by the future. It's just after waking up and she can eat so much, it's surprising. I decided to walk to the station as I left the house. Before getting too far, I looked back at the familiar our home and said with emotion, I really owe this house a lot, except for my mother-in-law. I've been grateful to this home for a long time. To my grandmother-in-law, my father-in-law, Austin, and Nolan. I even feel indebted to the roof and the walls, but I can't recall ever needing my mother-in-law's help. Somehow, I feel incredibly lighthearted. I hurried to the place where my beloved family was waiting, pulling a slightly large suitcase behind me. I plan to stay at the hotel for 2 nights and 3 days. After that, I'm set to move into a new place where I can live alone. I met up with Austin at my brother's wedding venue. We had planned this beforehand. The reason the wedding was scheduled at this time was so Austin could be ashore and attend. Hard day, huh? Got this for you. Got a pen? With a lonely smile, Austin pulled out a divorce paper. His name hadn't been filled in yet. We were both going to sign it, mutually agreeing. It would be our final joint task as a couple. Thanks. Let's write it when we get back to the hotel. I booked a twin room, hope that's okay? Though it's sad for my brother getting married today, this is also a new beginning for us. I hope it's okay that our signing the divorce papers happens on the same day as the wedding. I won't announce it in front of everyone today, but we'll have to make it known later that we've divorced. Of course. A double would have been fine too. Thanks for booking. Austin and I smiled affectionately at each other. No one could possibly imagine that in a few hours, we'd be signing a divorce paper. I marvel at how heavy a single piece of paper can feel. Filing this means we won't be husband and wife anymore. After being together for over 30 years, just one sheet is all it takes. I'm truly sorry. Austin apologized, but I shook my head. Being with Austin was always genuinely happy for me. I knew when I married him that he wouldn't be home much, and there was nothing I disliked about that. It was just his mother that I could never get along with. Don't apologize, you were a wonderful husband. Let's be good friends from now on. I expressed this with all the fondness I felt. Tearfully, Austin took my hand. Thank you for everything. Austin repeated, making me tear up as well. I secretly decided to attribute these tears to happiness for my brother's wedding. The next day, Austin went back to his parents' home alone. He explained the situation to his in-laws. At first, my father-in-law was just shocked by the sudden mention of divorce, but when he understood the full story, he became furious. How dare you drive out someone who cared for my mother until the end? He shouted angrily, causing my mother-in-law to visibly panic. While I was primarily involved in caring for my grandmother-in-law, including the physically demanding tasks like bathing, my father-in-law, who had been strong since his youth, helped me. Towards the end, he also took care of turning our bedridden grandmother in bed. In a way, my father-in-law and I were caregiving partners. However, my mother-in-law really hadn't helped with anything. It seems my father-in-law had been silently resentful about this. You've been terrible at housework ever since you married into the family. I kept quiet because you gave birth to our son, but you used my mother's leniency as an excuse to avoid helping out. You're nothing like Margaret, who did everything. His grievances escalated. My mother-in-law tried to retort when compared to me, but my father-in-law started speaking before she could get a word in. It should have been you who left. To think we lost a hard-working daughter-in-law like that. Do you have any idea how much luxury Margaret's salary provided us? You haven't earned a single penny. Mentioning money put my mother-in-law in a weak position. She had never worked outside the home. The household expenses, including what my in-laws used, were covered by Austin. Being a sailor, Austin earned a good salary, and my in-laws converted all their pension into pocket money. Honestly, our family was wealthy. The costs related to the children or my grandmother-in-law's care could actually be covered by Austin's earnings. Yet I worked because working was fulfilling for myself. That's why I had no problem using my earnings for the family. I gave trips and theater tickets to my in-laws, and for birthdays, I would treat them to upscale dining. Truthfully, these gifts were also investments in securing some time for myself. It's not too late. Austin, go apologize now and ask Margaret to marry you again. My father-in-law finally said. Realizing how precarious her position was, my mother-in-law was utterly distraught. But it was too late. She couldn't prevent the consequences of her actions from coming back to haunt her. This is the house I built. You leave. My father-in-law, finally enraged, began to drive my mother-in-law out. Understandably, she resisted vehemently, screaming and scratching at her disheveled hair in frustration. Just as she raised her voice in anger, she began clawing at her unkempt hair, repeating how frustrated she was. This sight was bizarre and apparently quite frightening. No! I won't leave, I won't divorce. How am I supposed to live alone at this age? In the end, she cried out in resistance, but she was no match for my physically imposing father-in-law, who dragged her out of the house. Moreover, he firmly shut the door and even locked it. My mother-in-law clung to the front door, crying loudly enough that the neighbors, shocked by the commotion, called the police. Reluctantly, my father-in-law opened the door when approached by the police, but his anger did not subside. For several days afterward, my mother-in-law and father-in-law lived as if they were separated within the same house. They didn't speak a word to each other. They avoided even looking at each other. In fact, whenever my father-in-law entered the same room, my mother-in-law would flee in fear. Such a life couldn't continue, and ultimately, my father-in-law even called his daughter, who lived far away, to hold a family meeting. "I'm going to divorce her," he declared, but his daughter showed sympathy for my mother-in-law and opposed the idea, making the discussion difficult. Austin then detailed the situation, confirming each instance of harassment I had endured. She had even lied to our son, trying to turn him against me, his mother. Austin presented emails he had asked our son to write, recalling those times as evidence. He also spoke about the suffering I endured during my menopause. To this point, my father-in-law, who had witnessed it, expressed his disapproval. I hadn't known, but he had told my mother-in-law to stop such behavior afterward. He had advised her to apologize, but she had not followed through. And now, this incident. She had unfairly criticized my brother and mockingly told me to divorce and leave. All this happened while Austin was away, and she acted differently in front of him. Austin added that I had managed all the household chores and that I, along with the caregiver, had completed caring for my grandmother-in-law. In that situation, how would you feel if your husband's mother did the same to you? And if your father-in-law got angry on your behalf, whose side would you take? When Austin posed this question, his sister fell silent. Seeing this, my mother-in-law became furiously upset. "Are you betraying me too? After all I did by giving birth to you?" Hearing she didn't claim to have raised them, I ironically admired her honesty. I had always asked Austin about this. "It was mostly our grandmother who took care of my sister and me. Mom was always out with neighbors." Perhaps remembering her past, his sister looked at my mother-in-law with contempt after hearing about the bullying. In the end, the only working housewives in this house were my grandmother-in-law, whom I cared for until the end, and myself. My mother-in-law was indeed the mother who had given birth to 2 children. However, when it came to housework, she mostly just wanted to reap the benefits without doing much work. By reflecting on this, her habitual negligence was finally noticed by the family, completely undermining her position. Realizing her situation, my mother-in-law stopped her tirades and began to sob. In the end, it was decided not to divorce out of pity, but my father-in-law is considering separating from her. Upon hearing this, I expressed my desire to meet with my father-in-law. All these events after my departure were relayed to me by Austin. "If Dad was going to get so angry now, he should have helped Margaret from the start. But then again, what can I say when I wasn't there?" Austin sighed despondently, sipping his hot coffee. We were in our favorite cafe, a place we had liked since our younger days. Austin ordered a coffee, and I chose a soft drink, which I hadn't had in a very long time. As I finished hearing about my mother-in-law's disgraceful behavior, I smiled softly. "Don't be too hard on yourself. You were away because of your job, right? It's an important job. There are many people who rely on you, I understand that." My words of encouragement weren't false. Austin's job is admirable. Being a sailor, supporting people's lives by working in maritime shipping, sometimes away for years at a time, I think that's incredible. That's why I've been putting up with it. But I'm sorry for this time. I still like and respect you, but I just couldn't bear being family with your parents anymore. I finally managed to say the words that had been stuck in my chest for so long. Austin looked a bit sad but nodded in understanding. He didn't blindly side with his parents just because they were his family. He understood the situation fairly, which made me incredibly happy. I couldn't help but smile broadly, and Austin looked at me as if dazzled. I only heard about what Austin was feeling at that moment much later. He said he thought, "Oh, she's beautiful." Your smile was more radiant than ever before. To me, at that moment, Austin also seemed sweeter than ever before. Now, back to the story. The day after I met Austin at the cafe, I met with his father, with Austin's cooperation. It was time for the final act of my revenge. When Austin's father arrived at the cafe, he was dressed a bit more stylishly than usual since he was going out. After some small talk about the weather, I quickly brought up the main topic. I heard from Austin that you're considering separating from your wife. It's fine while you're still healthy, but it'll be tough on your own later, right? Especially after all the commotion. If you really do decide to separate, I'm willing to help with caring for you in your later years. His father clearly looked pleased by this. Austin's sister lived far away, and his son Austin could be away for long periods at sea. He had never been one to do much around the house like cooking, cleaning, or laundry. He would surely appreciate my help, having taken care of his mother until the end. Of course, I'll separate from her. No, wait, maybe it's better to divorce, he said, furrowing his brow and crossing his arms. I was hoping that my almost certainly ousted mother-in-law would go from almost to definitely ousted, but it seemed the situation was developing even more unfavorably for her. However, it seems that the situation is becoming increasingly unfavorable for my mother-in-law. If I suddenly drop dead, she'd probably make a big fuss, wouldn't she? Better to divorce her properly before that. That's definitely better. Austin looked as if he wanted to say "here we go again" as his father began speaking more decisively. His father has a tendency to act swiftly once he's made up his mind. Sometimes he even goes a bit too far, but that's just his nature. Knowing this, I nodded in agreement with a grin. You really do think things through. I'm impressed by your foresight, I said, knowing how to handle him after living with him for so many years. Pushing him a little like this would likely lead him to actually do it. Austin chuckled, sensing my intentions, but chose not to stop me. Probably he felt more angered by my mother-in-law's behavior than I was. His father, energized, stood up to go get the divorce papers right then. Out of kindness, I decided to introduce the lawyer Austin and I consulted for our divorce to help my father-in-law. From that day on, my father-in-law began actively pursuing the divorce. It was clear that my mother-in-law was destined for a lonely life. A week later, I returned to what was once my familiar home, now just my former in-laws' house. I went to collect the belongings I hadn't been able to take with me before. I had taken all the valuables, but it was impossible to take everything. Clothes, books, photos filled with memories, drawings by my son when he was little, and bedding and furniture I bought with my own salary. Over the years, I had accumulated many personal items in that house. This visit turned out to be the last time I would see my mother-in-law. By then, her divorce had been decided, and she was visibly panicking. As I went to collect my belongings, she began to kneel before me, her face pale as she started apologizing. Margaret, please forgive me, I beg you. It was all just a joke. Please come back and convince your husband. I completely ignored her and continued packing. After continued groveling, my mother-in-law stood up abruptly. It seems she was upset at being ignored. She began to hurl vile insults at me again, reverting to her old ways. This woman! How dare you, when I'm being so humble? You've been nothing but trouble since you married into this family. Just leave and die alone miserably. After a string of simpler yet unrepeatable insults, she spat as she shouted those words at me. Still, I continued to ignore her and packed the items into a cardboard box. Suddenly, she screamed and lunged at the box. Taken aback, I dodged, and she ended up overturning the box that contained neatly folded clothes. The neatly folded clothes were scattered all over the floor. She then began stomping on and kicking the clothes like throwing a tantrum. Enough already! Austin shouted and glared at her, standing tall. His mother, usually hearing only compliance from her obedient son, froze as if it were the end of the world. I held back Austin with one hand and turned an emotionless face towards my mother-in-law. I am no longer your daughter-in-law. You are no longer my mother-in-law. Our relationship is completely severed. Thank you for nothing. I was helped by your mother and father-in-law, your husband. I swiftly stepped around the scattered clothes. Without bothering to fold them again, I just stuffed them into the box and lifted it up. Don't touch my things, stranger. Goodbye. I tossed those final words at the disheveled mother-in-law and quickly left the room. I had no desire to share space with that woman any longer. I called Austin to take care of the rest of the belongings. I got into the car driven by my brother and waited as he prepared to leave. I could still hear my mother-in-law shrieking from inside the house, but listening to her was a waste of time. After we left, I heard she continued to beat her own head and wailed terribly. As far as I was concerned, there was never a chance for reconciliation, but it seemed she deeply regretted cutting off her last hope. But her regrets were too late to matter to anyone. About a month later, my mother-in-law was finally evicted from the house and began living alone in a modest place. Austin occasionally visits his mother to check on her well-being, as does his sister. I've heard that my mother-in-law now lives in her old clothes, substituting for pajamas, and doesn't even bother to take a shower regularly. Apart from shopping, she hardly goes outside, spending her days eating fast food and budget snacks while lamenting her impoverished life. Apparently, she did split some assets with my father-in-law during the divorce, but sadly, it wasn't a significant amount, and she's living with financial insecurity in her old age. I don't know about my sister, but I'm not giving her any support. That's obvious, right? Austin told me this with a shrug. As a well-paid sailor, Austin was always a source of pride for his mother. She never expected to be completely cut off by her own son. All this was because she constantly disregarded me, the wife her son chose. And yet, the irony is that she herself had said, "Never come back and just get a divorce and leave." Now she's the one who can't ever come back. It's exactly like the saying, "Curses return upon the heads of those that curse." She should have been prepared to face her own misfortunes if she wished ill on others. 5 years after the divorce. I'm enjoying a peaceful life alone with my cat in an apartment about a 30-minute drive from what used to be my in-laws' home. I settled here after looking for a place convenient for commuting to work. The rental is pet-friendly and even welcomes them. It's a lovely place with good sunlight. I still visit my former father-in-law's home once a week, cooking him various dishes. Our relationship has seemingly improved since the divorce. My sister-in-law, living far away, can hardly look me in the eye given how much I still help out. Austin and I still keep in touch. In fact, when he returns from his long sea voyages, we make sure to go on dates. It's almost like we're courting each other anew. We go to movies, visit museums, and despite being somewhat new at this, our relationship feels fresh and exciting. We spend hours on the phone and exchange messages, finding this surprisingly enjoyable. Nolan, who visits us on his days off, jokes about our fake divorce, saying, "You two just went back to being lovers, didn't you?" But the truth is, Austin and I never were lovers before. Our marriage was arranged, and we never really had a period of romance. So now, it's like I'm building a romantic relationship with him for the first time. We even have a secret pact. If we ever find ourselves completely free from having to deal with his mother, whether she passes away, moves in with his sister, or goes into a facility, then we'll remarry. Austin suggests that this would be when no more welfare checks on his mother are necessary. Discussions about whether his sister and her husband will start living with her or place her in a facility have already begun. Our reunion might not be so far off after all. After more than 30 years together and now nearing our 50s, it feels somewhat embarrassing to talk about this. But I'm thrilled at the prospect of experiencing a first true love with Austin, whom I've always cared for deeply. Huh? Sophia, did you make a new friend? My daughter Sophia is good at drawing and always shows me her works. But that day, the picture Sophia showed me had a girl I had never seen before. No matter how much it's a 6-year-old's drawing, I can usually tell who her friends are if I see them every day. Is this girl a new friend? That's what I thought when I asked her, but Sophia gave me an unexpected reply. "This is my sister. But she has a different mom." Sophia said this with an innocent smile. Sophia's sister? A different mom? What is Sophia talking about? Unable to understand the situation, I rushed to my brother, who is a lawyer. "My name is Emily. I'm a 29-year-old illustrator working from home. I met Chris at a mixer during my senior year of college, and since then, we've been living happily as a family of 3 with our daughter, Sophia. At least, that was the plan. I usually don't attend mixers, but at that time, there was someone who wanted to meet me. My friends, not wanting to miss out on a mixer with businessmen, pleaded with me to go, and I reluctantly attended. At this mixer, Chris pursued me earnestly, and as someone who was completely out of the dating game, I was swept off my feet by his charm, and we started dating. We ended up getting married the following year when I got pregnant. At that time, I was 23 years old, just about to start my career, and Chris was 3 years my senior at 26. My parents were strongly against marriage. But I was already head over heels for Chris and couldn't consider not having his child. In the end, I went against my parents' wishes and married Chris. I didn't know it at the time, but this was the beginning of my misfortune. Shortly after we married, I found out that Chris had been lying about various things. First, he wasn't a businessman but worked at a nearby factory. He also had a previous marriage and, in fact, had a child. I wouldn't have refused to marry him if I had known, but I was shocked that it had been kept from me. Chris thought that no one would accept him if they knew he worked at a factory. He thought no one would marry him if they knew he had a child from a previous marriage. Both lies were told out of his desire to marry me and stay with me. At the time, I was flattered that he wanted to marry me so badly. I was happy, believing he truly loved me. The reason for his divorce was that his wife had cheated and left home with their child. Clearly, it was his wife's fault, but it didn't change that it was his child. Chris told me he was sending $1,000 a month to his ex-wife as child support. Isn't $1,000 a month too much for child support? I did think that, but Chris wanted to provide, even if it meant stretching financially, because he couldn't be with his child. I saw Chris as a pure and kind person. After we got married, to save money, Chris moved into my place. I had been working from home as an illustrator since college. After winning a contest in my junior year, I started getting various job offers from companies and even held a solo exhibition. So, I had been living alone in a 3-bedroom condo since college. This space was sufficient for a child for the foreseeable future. Looking for a new place would have meant additional costs. So we decided it was best to live together here. Most of Chris's salary went to child support, so inevitably, rent and utilities continued to be covered by my salary as they had been when I was single. Honestly, if we could live happily as a family of 3, that was enough for me. However, after our daughter Sophia was born, Chris started coming home less and less. Chris's factory operates on a fixed rooster, so there shouldn't be any overtime, but he started coming home late, saying there were machine troubles. It started as just a few times a month, but by the time Sophia was 2, Chris would come home late from hanging out after work, saying things like, "I was invited by my colleague," or called by a buddy. Additionally, on weekends, he would leave for visitation days with his child from his previous marriage. Eventually, Chris rarely came home, and when he did, it was just to get some spending money. Then 4 years passed. One day, when Sophia turned 6, I got a call that my mother had suffered a stroke. Thankfully, she was not in life-threatening condition, but she needed to stay in the hospital for about 2 weeks. My father was traveling abroad for work, and like me, my brother had moved to the city and was thriving as a lawyer. I was the only one who could take care of our mother. I explained the situation to Chris and told him I wanted to go back to my parents' home until my mother was discharged. It's a 3-hour by plane from our home, so commuting between home and the hospital was not feasible. I can work from anywhere, but Sophia is still too young. She has school, so I can't take her with me, and she can't stay home alone. My friend takes care of Sophia after school on weekdays until the evening, but I can't leave her on nights and weekends. Chris, who hardly ever comes home, was the only one I could ask to take care of Sophia. I told Chris that even if it was just for this period, he needed to come home after work and look after Sophia. Chris, while concerned for my mother, reluctantly agreed, making a clearly reluctant face. Sophia will be at her friend's house until 6, so go pick her up. Then, could you handle dinner and homework? That'd be great, right? Every day? Yes, every day. What about the weekends? Stay with her on the weekends too. Can't you just take Sophia? I can't pull her out of school for 2 weeks. Besides, I'm not going out for fun. Help out for once. Sophia is your child too. After saying that, Chris reluctantly agreed. I explained the situation to Sophia, and the next day, I headed to my parents' house. Rushing to the hospital, fortunately, the symptoms were mild, and there was no lasting paralysis. My mother was able to be discharged a bit earlier than planned, on the 10th day. My father managed to adjust his work schedule to be back on the discharge day, and they could spend some time together at home. Relieved that my father had returned, I decided to go home a bit earlier than planned. I contacted the friend who had been taking care of Sophia and my other friends and went straight to my friend's house to pick up Sophia. After thanking my friend, I returned home, and while I cleaned, Sophia quietly worked on her picture diary. Sophia loves drawing just like me, and keeping a picture diary has become her daily routine. As I finished cleaning and went over to Sophia, her picture diary was almost complete. She said it was today's entry. Today's drawing depicted her playing with her friend Hannah, whose mom had been looking after Sophia. As a doting parent, I can easily tell who she is drawing because Sophia captures people's features so well. After finishing today's entry, Sophia also showed me the diaries from the days I was away. Most of them were of her playing with Hannah and Hannah's mom. I wondered if Chris really took good care of Sophia at night. Sophia would likely have mentioned it in her diary if Chris had fed her. While thinking this, I flipped through the diary. Then, I noticed the entry from the weekend I was at my parents' house. This was the day I couldn't ask my friend to watch Sophia, so I had asked Chris. But the drawing shows an unknown girl. The picture depicted Sophia and a girl I had never seen, playing house at home. There shouldn't be any friends at our house over the weekend I was away. Could it be the child from his previous marriage? But that child should be about teenage by now. What was going on? Puzzled, I asked Sophia. Huh? Sophia, did you make a new friend? This is at our house, right? Then Sophia surprised me with her response. This girl? Yes. This girl is Sophia's sister. But she has a different mom. What? I let out a bewildered voice unintentionally. What does it mean she has a different mom? Not a big sister, but a little sister? Grasping at any possibility, I asked Sophia again, but she replied, she's a sister. Because Lisa is only 4 years old and I'm already 6, so I'm the big sister, right? She answered innocently laughing, but this was no laughing matter. Lisa? A name suddenly mentioned that I had never heard before. Sophia's sister with a different mom. Does that mean she's Chris's child? I had heard that Chris had children before marrying me. But those were before we got married, so naturally, those children would be older than Sophia. There exists a younger child with a different mom than Sophia. There's only one thing that could mean. Overwhelmed, I found myself unconsciously heading to my brother's office, who is a lawyer. In a near-panic state, I approached him and he kindly welcomed me. He listened to my story with surprise and introduced me to a reliable detective. As I explained the situation to the detective while showing the picture, Sophia chimed in, "This is me, and this girl is Lisa. Lisa is 4 years old and she's my sister. But Lisa is mean, she hid my colored pencils. Dad told me that she has to be patient because I'm the big sister. If being mean is what having a sister means, maybe I don't want one." Both my brother and the detective were at a loss for words after hearing Sophia's story. A few days later, I received a call from the detective with the results of the investigation and went to my brother's law office again. My brother had already heard about the investigation from the detective and said to me, "You might want to brace yourself for this information. Are you okay?" But I was already prepared. It's okay. I kind of understand, and I'm ready. However, the results of the investigation were beyond my imagination. Chris seems to be having an affair. Well, that figures. Just as I imagined. When I asked, the detective seemed hesitant to continue. This is where you really need to brace yourself. Are you sure you're ready? Does that mean the affair partner is someone I wouldn't expect? Various people popped into and out of my mind. It couldn't be Hannah's mom, could it? No, that can't be. In the end, the only people I could think of were other moms. There's no use thinking about it alone. Please tell me. I resolutely told the detective to proceed, and he nodded before beginning. The other person is Grace. Do you know her? Grace? The name sounds familiar, but who is she? I can't recall. How is she connected to my husband? Then the detective revealed, she's Chris's ex-wife. What? His ex-wife? But she took the child and left home. Are you saying they got back together? Since when? Why? The answer filled my mind with confusion. My brother tried to calm me down by saying to take a moment, but I couldn't stay calm. Then the detective patiently answered my questions. It seems that the story about her taking the child and leaving home was a lie. What? Chris was the one who left home. Apparently, their divorce was not because of discord. Their relationship continued even after the divorce. Wait, that doesn't make sense. They were getting along but suddenly divorced and Chris left home. But their relationship continued? Yes. By the way, the child at that time, Karina, seems to be with Grace's parents. The only thing that matched the story I heard from Chris and reality was the fact that Chris and Grace had divorced. Sorting through the detective's information, it turns out that Chris and Grace got married shortly after high school due to an unexpected pregnancy. Chris then dropped out of college to start working at a factory to support the family. But his salary during his first year of day shift work was meager, and they struggled to make ends meet. Despite this, Grace was unsupportive, complaining about the crying child, pushing Karina off to her parents, and living lavishly without working, buying brand items. Living with Grace under such conditions meant inevitable financial hardship. Yet, it seems they still loved each other. They must have thought of some way to live together comfortably. That's when they came up with the idea of a fake divorce. If Chris remarried someone wealthy through a fake divorce, they could secure some money. Furthermore, if Grace takes care of Karina, they could also receive benefits. Chris thought that if he lived off his new wife's money, he could give all his earnings to Grace. It seemed like a win-win situation. In fact, Grace had reported to the welfare office and was receiving welfare benefits. With Chris's salary and the grants financially comfortable, they had Lisa 4 years ago. The weekend visits Chris claimed to be making to see his child from his previous marriage were not to see Karina, but to see Lisa, who was born 4 years ago. Even his weekday outings were visits to Grace. But despite his ongoing relationship with Grace and his affection for Lisa, Karina was still left with Grace's parents. I was stunned by their reckless actions. I felt no anger, sadness, or frustration. I was just utterly dumbfounded at them and at myself for being cluelessly content these past 4 years. But what disgusted me even more was how these two selfishly dragged countless others into their mess. Thinking of Chris probably at Grace's place even today made me want to confront them immediately, but my brother stopped me. He was right. Storming in there impulsively would only lead to them brazening it out. That wouldn't happen. I decided with my brother to carefully plan our next steps. I told Chris that our mother would be staying with my brother for her recovery, and that I would also stay there with Sophia for a while, and then left with Sophia. Having rented a condo near my brother's place during college because I felt safer there. I never imagined this decision would come to my rescue. My brother warmly welcomed us, and we began a temporary cohabitation. A few weeks later, as my brother predicted, Chris contacted me. He was furious on the phone. "Hey! What have you done? What is all this about? You won't get away with this." That should be my line. Does he even realize what he's done? Yet, I headed home to put the final touches on my plan, having arranged for Sophia to stay with Hannah's mom. When I arrived, predictably, Grace was there too. "This is my house, you know." Chris still demanded, "What the hell have you done?" He didn't even try to hide Grace's presence. But soon after realizing he wasn't dealing with just me, he was lost for words. Yes, I had returned with not just my brother but also Chris's parents. After explaining everything to them, they knelt down and offered their help. I confronted him coolly. "What do you mean by what have you done? What are you talking about?" Chris probably hadn't expected me to be so assertive. He stammered, "Well, I mean..." He struggled to speak. Grace, seeing Chris's parents, tensed up and looked down. Were they giving up too soon? I pressed them. "You won't know unless you talk. Explain what happened with your own words." Not that I didn't know already, but it's important to hear it from them. I pressed them hard. "The welfare office called about the support allowance. Maybe Emily knows something about it?" Chris started speaking meekly. Where did his earlier defiance go? It seems the welfare office had contacted Grace about potential fraud in her benefit claims. My brother had inquired with the office and predicted they would contact her today. I again confronted them. "So you've been deceiving me all this time?" "Well, not deceiving per se. Not just me, you've also been lying to the government and collecting various benefits, right? Did you seriously think you'd never get caught?" "Really, we didn't intend to deceive anyone. It just turned out this way." "What? What are you talking about? This is obviously premeditated. Even our meeting was orchestrated by you." I was completely fooled. How stupid of me. "No, that's not it. I mean, of course, I love Emily too." Chris tried desperately to explain, but with his remarks, Grace exploded. "What? Love? Then why have a child with this woman? It makes no sense." "Because if we were getting married, having a kid was the quickest way," Grace said. Then they started arguing with each other. "Can we please put your squabbling aside for now?" I interrupted them, exasperated, and Chris said, "I'm truly sorry. It was all my fault. Please forgive me." He begged. "What? Forgive? Who do you think you're asking for forgiveness after all you've done, lying even to the government, and now you ask for forgiveness when your position is threatened? No way. Don't underestimate me." When I shouted, Chris's father seemed to reach his limit and scolded, "Chris, enough is enough." At that moment, further visitors arrived at our house. They were Grace's parents. Apparently, Chris's mother had contacted them. As soon as Grace's parents entered the room, they confronted her. "What do you mean you were divorced? We weren't informed. We're cutting ties with you. Karina will never see you again. Karina has said he doesn't want to see you ever again. We will also take Lisa with us. We came today just to tell you this." Then, turning to me, they said, "We are truly sorry for everything." With that, they took Lisa and really left. It seems Grace's parents were kept in the dark about the divorce, and the couple had occasionally taken Lisa to visit Karina. What kind of nerve do these two have? Ultimately, both children were taken by Grace's parents, and they cut ties with Chris and Grace. "Wait! Lisa!" Grace cried out, but it was too late. It was already too late to regret her actions. Afterward, Grace was presumably shocked by Lisa being taken away. Her eyes were vacant, and she was out of touch with reality. There was no point in discussing anything. Chris, realizing there was nothing more he could do, collapsed to the floor, repeatedly muttering, "I'm sorry." We left the two of them despondent and went home. Later, with my brother's intervention, our divorce was finalized smoothly. Chris started paying for Sophia's child support. Without any financial strategy, the two naturally incurred a significant debt. Though both children were taken in by Grace's parents, living on Chris's salary while managing two adults and repaying debt was extremely difficult. But it wasn't just me demanding repayment. The government also issued an order to return the improperly received benefits. Eventually, Grace was evicted from her place as she couldn't pay the rent, and now it's unclear where or how the two of them are living together. Thinking of the future, I decided to move. I considered taking Sophia back to our hometown, but she had just started elementary school. Respecting Sophia's wish not to leave her friends, we decided to stay in the suburb. I rented another condo near my brother's place, where Sophia and I are now living happily together. Mom, I've been pinching pennies to send money home, and now you're saying banning me from visiting? Isn't that a bit harsh? Said the daughter-in-law angrily. Banned from the house? What's that about? I didn't understand what she was talking about, so I furrowed my brows in confusion. My son and his wife always send me money, living alone as I do. I'm deeply grateful for the significant money they send, so being banned is absolutely out of the question. Yet, why has it come to this? And not even a thank you? That's incredibly rude. Wait, can you explain a bit more about what you're talking about? Something was off. Something was wrong. I decided to calm down my agitated daughter-in-law and listen to her story. Then, an unbelievable truth came to light. This is unacceptable. We'll have to teach them a lesson. Confronted with conflicting facts, the two of us stood up. Thus, I and my daughter-in-law decided to take revenge on the person who caused this misunderstanding. I am Yulia. I've been a corporate worker living frugally with my son Richard since my divorce 10 years ago. Becoming a single mother, I didn't want my son to suffer, so I worked multiple jobs desperately. Maybe my son felt lonely because of it, but I managed to combine the money I earned and the child support from my ex-husband to successfully send him to the private university he wanted to attend. I still remember him saying on the day he got accepted, "Mom, thank you so much. I'm gonna do my best." Children grow up so fast, and Richard graduated from college in no time, then started working at the company run by my ex-husband. Even after our divorce, Richard had a good relationship with his father, and they kept in touch often. I never blamed him for having a relationship with his father, and I didn't complain when he decided to work for his father's company out of respect for his decision. After becoming an adult, Richard married a woman named Natalie. She also worked at the same company. My daughter-in-law was not particularly friendly by any stretch. Even when we met to get acquainted, she was expressionless all the time, and even now that she's married to my son, I've never seen her smile. When we talk, she doesn't start conversations, responding only minimally to greetings and necessary dialogue. She probably doesn't like me very much. My son looked happy with her, so I didn't oppose their marriage and blessed their union. Upon marriage, my son moved out. Living alone in the house we used to share, the emptiness became palpable. While I was happy that Richard had successfully left the nest, I had braced myself for this day, but the loneliness still hit hard. The couple moved to a different city within the same state, so while I could see them if necessary, they weren't exactly close by. I was worried I wouldn't see my son much anymore after he moved out. Though I thought this, he would occasionally drop by even after getting married. At first, I held back because I didn't want to impose on his new wife, but he said, "I thought you'd be lonely if I just disappeared, Mom." He's truly a thoughtful son. The time we spent eating and chatting together was my healing time. "Thanks, Mom, the meal was delicious. And sorry, but..." When my son would come over, he would awkwardly ask for some spending money at the end of his visit. His wife Natalie probably didn't like it, but thinking about him still coming to visit made me want to give it to him. Besides, being newlyweds, they probably had a lot of expenses, like furniture. Sometimes he would ask for a big amount like $1,000, which might surprise me, but maybe he wanted to make a good impression on his new wife. I had given him money a few times as a thank you for visiting. Even though we are family, the way he respectfully bowed his head when thanking me made it feel worthwhile. I'm grateful that my son visits, but I've sworn to live each day without causing any trouble for him and his wife as much as possible. Perhaps it was this determination that led me to push myself too hard at work. I suffered a stroke at my workplace. According to the hospital, overwork was the cause. A coworker noticed something was off with me and quickly called an ambulance, but I was left with a disability. My walking speed has decreased, and I've lost my sense of balance, making it necessary to lean on something to stand up or change direction. Walking alone became difficult. Perhaps if I had eased up on my work, this wouldn't have happened. How am I supposed to explain this to my son? After being told I needed to stay in the hospital for a while, I called my son to let him know about my situation and that I wouldn't be able to come home. Richard and Natalie rushed to the hospital immediately. "Mom, are you okay? I heard about the walking disability." Richard burst through the door and rushed to my bedside. With a worried look, he gently held my hand. Natalie followed him and stood beside him, as calm as ever. She was expressionless as usual, and it was hard to tell what she was thinking. Her cold gaze seemed to say that this was a hassle. I really can't burden them. "Thanks for both coming, but I'm fine." "You're obviously not fine. You're in the hospital. We're gonna visit you often." "It's okay, you don't have to. You tend to overreact." "It's not an overreaction. I'm worried about you, right, Natalie?" When Richard sought her agreement, Natalie reluctantly nodded. Even though I felt uneasy about Natalie, I was internally happy that they were coming to visit. From then on, the busy working couple would visit me on weekends. The conversation was mostly between Richard and me, while Natalie quietly handled things like changing clothes or arranging the visitation gifts. It was fun to talk with my son, but the distance between Natalie and me didn't seem to close. Even when I said thank you, she would just reply in a low tone, "No problem," without much warmth. Then one day, Richard came to visit alone. Before I could ask how Natalie was, Richard started speaking. "Hey Mom, I've been thinking of sending you some money from now on." I was surprised by the sudden suggestion. I never expected my son, who had been asking for pocket money, to offer such a thing. "I shouldn't take it," I said, but Richard just gave me a gentle smile. "You quit your job, right? With your disability, it's gonna be tough after you leave the hospital. It's better to have some money." Because of my walking disability, I had quit my job since I couldn't work as before. I planned to look for a job I could still do, and with my savings, I should be okay for a while. "That's okay, you and Natalie earned that money, use it for yourselves?" "What are you talking about? You put me through college. Let me repay you and show my gratitude." With such a strong offer from Richard, I decided to accept his generosity. I wanted to cherish the thoughtfulness of my son, who was always thinking of me. I was proud to see how much he had grown. From that day, Richard began visiting the hospital alone. With a guilty look, he would hand me $10. "Sorry, this is all I can give right now. I was planning to give more, but Natalie gets upset. She says we should prioritize our own family first." "No, I'm just happy you're sending anything. Could you thank Natalie for me?" "Sure, I'll tell her tonight." It seems Natalie isn't pleased with the money being sent to me. It looks like she won't be visiting me anymore. Still, since Richard continues to send money, I wanted to at least express my gratitude to Natalie, so I always handed him a thank you note. I carefully put the $10 into my wallet, and the days of chatting with my son continued for 3 months until I was discharged. Walking was still difficult, and I couldn't move around the house as before. While I was hospitalized, Richard had suggested that we might need to remodel the house for caregiving, but that would require their involvement and presence during the process. Thinking I could manage in my familiar home and not wanting to burden them further, I hesitated, but it seemed remodeling might be necessary after all. Caring for me, Richard started coming over once a week around noon. He would do the shopping for me or withdraw a month's living expenses on my behalf. It was a great relief to have Richard taking care of various things. On a certain weekday, after a long absence, Natalie made a rare visit to my house. "I'm sorry for the sudden visit. May I come in?" Natalie's expression was stern. Her voice also sounded somewhat angry. "Yes, of course, but what brings you here all of a sudden? Did you come with Richard?" "No, I came alone. Richard doesn't know." A visit without Richard knowing was indeed unusual. I invited Natalie into the living room for the time being. I was about to serve some tea, but she shook her head, so I sat down and she took a seat opposite me. With a stern face, she glared at me and said in a low growling voice, "Mom, I know you don't like me, but I've been saving desperately and sending you a lot of money. Despite that, not only do you not thank me, but what's this about banning me from visiting?" Natalie's words puzzled me, and I furrowed my brow in confusion. A lot of money? Banned from visiting? She thinks I dislike her? What on earth is she talking about? I couldn't make sense of the story, so now it was my turn to ask her. "Wait, what do you mean?" "That's my line. Didn't you say you couldn't stand me and wanted me to stop coming over? That you didn't want to see my face or speak with me?" I was stunned. How did things get to this point? Apparently, Richard had told her that I had said those things. I had never thought any such thing, let alone said she was banned. Every time I received the money, I had given Richard a thank you note to pass on to her. "I've never said you were banned. There should have been thank you notes as well, right? Thank you notes?" Now it was Natalie's turn to frown. According to her, she had never received any thank you notes. Looking at her expression, she seemed to be telling the truth. That's strange. Richard always said, "I'll pass it on to Natalie." Could it really be that she never received any? Before addressing that, there was something else I needed to ask about. It was about a lot of money. I was receiving $10 from my son. The value of a lot of money can be subjective, but to me, $10 certainly wasn't a large sum. However, I cherished it, thinking of it as a kind gesture from Richard and Natalie. But I had a feeling that wasn't what she meant. "I just want to clarify, how much exactly are you saying you sent? If you're receiving it, you should know, shouldn't you? It's $26,000. $26,000? An absurdly large amount that made me exclaim in surprise. Indeed, that would definitely qualify as a lot of money. But I had never received such an amount from Richard. "Wait a minute, I've only been getting $10 from Richard." $10? Stop joking around, I've been sending Richard $26,000. Now Natalie was the one astonished. If what she was saying was true, her reaction made sense. The supposed $26,000 turning into $10 was certainly a cause for shock. A strange silence followed our conflicting stories. Natalie, furrowing her brow and looking stern, was the one to break the silence. "Mom, actually." She started to speak hesitantly. According to her, it was Natalie who had suggested sending the money in the first place. She raised her son on her own, and she respected me greatly for trying to live independently even now. She was pained to see the series of hardships I had faced culminating in my walking disability and suggested sending money to help. However, Richard opposed the idea. He said their own lives were more important and refused her proposal. After an argument, he reportedly spat out dismissively, "If you want to send money from your allowance, then just do it with whatever you're earned." She had immediately prepared $26,000 to bring on a visitation day, but Richard stopped her. "She told me I'd forgotten to mention, Natalie doesn't have to visit anymore. She's banned from her house too. Mom hates Natalie and she's a burden. Never show your face to Mom again. I'll handle the money." Richard told her to stay home and took the money she had prepared to send. It was sad, but knowing herself to be reserved and easily misunderstood, she thought it couldn't be helped even if I disliked her. Her respect for me didn't change, even though she felt disliked. But it didn't sit right with her that she was banned and not even thanked while she was sending money from her own allowance. Then, hiding it from Richard, she decided to visit me to speak her mind. I was shocked. Natalie didn't seem like she was lying. It was hard to believe that my kind son would lie to both of us and embezzle money. I had never said I disliked her, but apparently, Richard had been ingraining the idea that I didn't think highly of Natalie for a long time. Her always being expressionless might have been influenced by Richard's actions. Then, a troubling thought struck me. Richard had been managing my bank account. With this story in mind, a dreadful premonition crossed my mind. No way, surely Richard wouldn't do such a thing. I explained the situation to Natalie, and she accompanied me to the bank. Nervously checking my bank account, I was shocked into silence. The balance is lower. The amounts Richard had been giving me and the figures in the bank account clearly didn't match. Richard had been skimming money. I could hear my trust crumbling inside. Natalie gently patted my back, offering consolation. Lost for words from the betrayal, she quietly spoke up. I hate to bring this up now, but Richard said he's staying at your place again this weekend. I'm sorry, but could you ask him to cut back on the frequent overnights? He doesn't come home at all during the weekends. Hearing the word overnights, I looked at Natalie. This weekend again? Richard has never stayed overnight. He comes in the morning, eats lunch, and leaves. That was the case last week too. It's always like that, so I assume it will be the same this week. Natalie's face fell. It seems Richard has been telling her he spends both weekend days at my house, but he doesn't return home. However, his visits are at most half a day long. Since his marriage, Richard had said Natalie would be lonely, and he never stayed overnight at my home. With a saddened expression, she murmured, I understand, and we parted ways. My doubts about Richard remained. A few days later, I received a call from Natalie. Richard has been having an affair. Hearing her words, I was speechless for a while. I had suspected something was off when he lied about staying at my place, but an affair was beyond my expectations. That day, suspicious of the discrepancies in our conversation, Natalie had secretly followed Richard after he said he would be home late. He left work on time and met someone. A strange woman appeared, and they walked arm in arm to a hotel. It must have been quite a shock. Her voice trembling with anger and sorrow conveyed how deeply Natalie was hurt. Stealing money, lying, and now cheating. I felt ashamed of such a despicable son and apologized to Natalie. The kind face he had shown me all this time must have been part of his schemes. At the same time, anger began to bubble up within me. I can't forgive this. Betraying me is one thing, but betraying his own wife is something else. As his mother, I couldn't just let his misdeeds go unchecked. Natalie, let's teach Richard a lesson. My voice was firm, and Natalie seemed surprised by my resolve. I can't forgive him either. But are you sure? He's your son. He's my son, and that's exactly why I need to correct him. He needs to understand what he has done. Natalie nodded vigorously, following my lead. Together, we decided to take action against my son. The following weekend, Richard came to my house as planned. After lunch, he began preparing to leave rather quickly. Natalie had told me that Richard said he would be staying at my house that day, but obviously, he had no intention of staying. He likely had plans to meet his mistress. Richard, rummaging through the drawer for the cash card, looked guilty as he spoke to me. Sorry, Mom, I'm busy today, so I'll just withdraw the money and head back. We haven't done this month's yet, right? I inwardly smirked. No, if you're that busy, you don't need to withdraw anything today. I still have some money left from last month, so you can go back without worrying about it. I feigned ignorance, smoothly declining his request. My usual compliance turning into refusal surprised him, but he persisted. But Mom, you know having extra money never hurts. What if you run out? With your walking, withdrawing money would be difficult. I think it's fine to take out another month's worth now. Just the necessary amount is fine. If we withdraw too much, it might just lead to unnecessary spending. No matter how many times he was told, I shook my head in refusal, and Richard's smile twitched unnervingly. He seemed to be straining to maintain his expression. After frowning as if he was in a losing position, Richard then pleaded in a cajoling voice. It was a typical tactic of his. Then, I really hate to ask, but could you lend me some money? I'm in a bit of a bind. You know, Natalie gets mad about the money I send you. Instead of sending money and getting scolded, he should just stop sending it. I bit back the retort, forced a smile, and shook my head gently. Sorry, I actually have to run an errand soon, so I can't help you with money today. Maybe next time. All right, I'll just take the cash card then. That way I can get you the money quickly when you need it. It seemed like Richard realized that pushing further was futile after being denied 3 times. However, he still took the card and left the house. Normally, I would insist that he not take the card, but today, I let it slide. As soon as he left, I called Natalie. Natalie, Richard just left the house. Understood. Let's go. I had asked her to wait nearby my house, and with her help, we secretly followed Richard. He entered a convenience store and stopped in front of the ATM. Why can't I withdraw any money? Is this piece of junk broken? Richard's voice was irritable. He couldn't withdraw money and was cursing loudly. The reason was that he couldn't withdraw from my bank account. Richard, what are you doing? I told you today you didn't need any money. What? When I called out from behind him, Richard's shoulders jerked in surprise. He had been so focused on the ATM that he hadn't noticed our presence at all. In fact, I had changed the account's PIN a little while ago. Today was supposed to be the day he withdrew money for me. I assumed he was counting on my money, especially since he probably had plans to meet his mistress later and would need it. If he was the type to siphon off someone else's money, I figured he would head to the ATM regardless of what I said. I figured that someone who takes money without permission would head to the ATM regardless of how much I refused. My suspicions were confirmed. The plan was to catch him in the act of trying to withdraw money without permission. Mom? And Natalie? Why are you here? Richard was clearly shocked, not expecting us to be there, sweating profusely with disbelief written all over his face. He was sweating profusely, with disbelief written all over his face. Natalie quickly grabbed his arm. Let's go back to your mother's house for now. You know why, don't you, Richard? Richard stayed silent, not uttering a word. Quietly, he was led back to my house, and we sat across from him at the table. Natalie was seated next to me. You were trying to take money from my account without permission, weren't you? And I heard you've been skimming from the money Natalie sends too. She says she's been sending $26,000. Where did the rest go? What are you talking about, Mom? You believe Natalie over your own son? I would never do such a thing. As I pressed him calmly, Richard frantically denied everything. Then Natalie interjected. Quit the poor act, Richard. On top of everything, you're even cheating. Cheating? That's outrageous. Stop slandering me. Where's the proof? Despite our confrontations, Richard continued to make excuses, clearly determined not to admit any wrongdoing. He seems determined not to admit any wrongdoing. Can you still make excuses after seeing this? I show the bank account balance, while Natalie confronts Richard with photos proving the affair. At that moment, Richard's face turns pale. His usually evasive mouth finally shuts. There's no escaping it now. However, sweating profusely and silent, Richard suddenly slams the table loudly. What's the big deal? So what if I cheated? Natalie, why do you give her the money instead of me? Give it to me. Pointing and shouting, Richard suddenly becomes defensive. He was gentle in front of me, but in front of his wife, he was like a tyrant. I had never seen this side of my son before. Now he points at me, shouting angrily. You say not to withdraw money. But it's only natural for you to give me money after making me feel lonely with just one parent around, isn't it? Every time I came over, you gave me money. Just be an ATM and don't talk back. Now I'm the one left speechless. I thought I was helping by fulfilling his wishes, thinking he felt lonely. But it turns out, I was just a convenient ATM to him. All those kind expressions were just a facade. I'm completely disillusioned by my son's drastic change. If that's how he thinks, I'm done holding back. To cheat and then tell your mother something like that is unbelievable. I want a divorce. I can no longer see you as my son. You're going to return all the money you took without permission. And make sure you repay Natalie too. Both of us make it clear, and then Richard starts to panic. Seeming distressed by the situation, tears fill his eyes as he frantically shakes his head and looks pleadingly at both me and Natalie. It's not like that. There's a reason for everything. His continued excuses were frustrating, even for his own mother. Gesticulating wildly, he begins his excuses again, looking like a pitiful abandoned puppy. You wouldn't know this, Mom, but Dad's business failed and he's been struggling with money. That's why I've been taking money to help him. What an excuse. Once again, I'm astounded by my son pulling his father into this. Oh really? I didn't know about that. Let's call him right now then. What? Richard's voice falters against my composed demeanor. I take out my smartphone without hesitation and dial my ex-husband. He probably thought mentioning the name of my ex-husband, whom we divorced, would get him off the hook from my questioning. Richard seems to believe that my ex-husband and I divorced on bad terms, but it was actually an amicable separation. I still occasionally talk to my ex-husband, especially since he knew about my walking disability. It's me. I heard you failed in business and are struggling financially? No, everything's going well here. Who said that? It was Richard. He said he's been taking money from my account to help you because you're in trouble. What's going on? While Richard panics, I explain everything to my ex-husband, who growls with contained anger. What? I understand the situation. I'll thoroughly investigate if Richard has been causing any trouble at the company too. Hearing this from her ex-husband, Richard turned deathly pale. Even within the family, he was causing such problems. It's possible he was involved in some serious misconduct at work too. I'm sorry. If I had been able to properly educate him both as an employee and as a person, none of this would have happened. I truly apologize to Natalie as well. I'll make sure Richard takes responsibility and compensates. I nodded and hung up the phone with my ex-husband. But it wasn't just the ex-husband's fault. This isn't it. Please forgive me, Mom. My son, still half crying, clung to me, but I knew I couldn't coddle him any longer and glared at him sternly. You betray your own wife and then try to blame others for the money you've stolen. Shame on you. Richard, I'm disowning you. No way. I was done letting him leech off me. Unable to make excuses and not forgiven, Richard slumped to the floor in despair. And so, the drama with my son came to a close. Afterwards, Richard and Natalie's divorce was finalized. Through lawyers, he agreed to repay the money he had withdrawn from my account and to deposit monthly the amount he had taken from Natalie's support. Natalie also sued Richard and his mistress for damages and successfully received her due compensation. According to my ex-husband's investigations, Richard had been acting haughty as the boss's son, delegating his work to other employees without doing much himself, and it all came out and he was fired. His subsequent re-employment efforts didn't last, and he's currently bouncing from job to job. Burdened by the repayments and damages, he had to leave the apartment he had been living in and has moved to an old apartment. Abandoned by his mistress, Richard now finds himself lonely and without anyone to rely on. On the other hand, I still see Natalie occasionally since her divorce from my son, and we discovered shared interests, and now she smiles at me when we talk. The frequent contacts with my ex-husband during this ordeal led to us reconciling after 10 years apart. Now, enjoying a renewed marital life, I'm living my days to the fullest. Hey, long time no see. One day, my ex-husband, who I had parted ways with 12 years ago, came to visit me. He brought along a bouquet of Phalaenopsis orchids. My name is Nancy Overton. I'm turning 53 this year. I met my ex-husband when I was 25. It was a chance encounter at a bar I went to with some friends, where Mike Richardson approached me. As an aside, it seems he fell for me at first sight. At the time, he was 35, already an entrepreneur, running an automobile dealership, and also owning 3 restaurants, a real go-getter. Among those who knew him, Mike was notorious for his womanizing ways, and not just his friends, but even the regulars at his favorite spots would tell me, "Nancy, you're something else for getting him to quit his womanizing." True or not, it seems that after we started dating, his outings with other women completely stopped. He himself would proudly say, "Before I met you, I was out with a different woman every week. But Nancy, you're fate for me. I knew the moment I met you that you were gonna be my last woman." Looking back, maybe I should have been more skeptical then. But still being young, I took it as a compliment and was thrilled. "I'm so happy. I'll do my best to be your last woman." Yeah, that's what I like to hear. As a businessman with a reputation, I appreciate a woman who's willing to go the extra mile for me. In hindsight, it's clear how nonsensical our conversation was. But for someone like me, who enjoyed talking about politics and international affairs, being with Mike, who was 8 years older and well-informed, was fun, and it made me feel a bit more grown-up than hanging out with guys my own age. Above all, I had fallen head over heels in love. During our relationship, we could only go on dates 2 or 3 times a month due to his busy schedule. Yet, our relationship was going well, and a year in, I found out I was pregnant. Mike was genuinely happy about the pregnancy. "Really? That's great. I'm gonna be a dad? Wow, I can't believe it." "Are you happy?" "Of course. Didn't I tell you, Nancy's my last woman? Aren't you happy?" "I was just a bit scared of how you would react since we've only been together for a year. Why worry about something so silly? Forget about it." "Yeah, I'm really happy too." Why was I anxious back then? It was because Mike had once said something like this. I had an ex-girlfriend who lied about being pregnant to get me to marry her. She was claiming she'd raise the child alone, but it was a pregnancy trap. Later, she started causing trouble over child support. It was so stressful. I kept quiet about this matter. Many of my friends didn't want to miss their chance to get married, and a few were even considering getting married because they got pregnant. I'm not one to judge which is worse, but I couldn't help feeling anxious that I might end up like them. Despite my worries, Mike was truly thrilled about my pregnancy. The very next day, he went with me to my parents' house to share the news and say hello. After that, I quit my job and spent my pregnancy helping Mike with his easier tasks. A few months later, I gave birth to our eagerly awaited first child. It was a girl and we named her Scarlett. 2 years after that, we welcomed our second daughter, Amy. What adorable little girls. "My little treasures," said Mike, as he doted on our daughters, actively participating in childcare tasks like changing diapers and giving baths. To anyone looking in, we must have seemed like the perfect happy family. However, I was struggling with Mike's emotional abuse. "Mike, thanks for all the help." "Huh? Who are you?" "What?" Mike's attitude changed right after our first child was born. I was struggling with the new challenges of childcare, on top of the household chores and helping with Mike's work. The lack of sleep made every day exhausting. I had neither the energy nor the desire for intimacy at night. "Sorry, I'm just too exhausted today." There were many nights when I had to say that. Each time, Mike would click his tongue in irritation and slam the door to show his anger. Realizing that this couldn't continue, I tried to have a talk with Mike. "Mike, I'm sorry. I'm still not used to taking care of a child. There's also the housework, and the deadline for that project is coming up fast. I'm exhausted every day. Once this project is done, how about we leave the kids with my mom and go on a date, just the two of us, like we used to? What? You're exhausted from doing half-assed cooking and cleaning? I only have 24 hours in a day, just like everyone else. With the little sleep I'm getting, of course I can't do everything perfectly. But Mike, being a perfectionist, couldn't hide his irritation with me. What? I'm trying my best. Even though I'm busy with the kids, I still make your lunch every day, and I clean every day, even if it's not perfect. Plus, I'm keeping up with my work too. You're using the kids as an excuse? You keep saying work, 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 but I only asked you to help because I thought you could. If you couldn't, you shouldn't have bragged about being able to from the start. What? No, I told you I couldn't do it right now. Then you were like, what, so I have to do it? So, I was like, then I'll do it. So, you're saying this is my fault? And who do you think you're talking to? You think you're better than me? Well, during our relationship, Mike's arrogance and selfishness were there, but they didn't bother me as much. However, he had traits closely resembling those of narcissistic personality disorder and was prone to emotional abuse. Just by refusing intimacy a few times, I was branded by him as a woman who doesn't conform to his wishes is unnecessary. From then on, he would take out his frustrations from work on me, and it wasn't rare for him to ignore me for a week without any reason. Moreover, when Mike was in a bad mood, he would say things like, I made a mistake. I should have stayed with Anna. She was so clean and would always leave my place spotless. Now that I think about it, Beth was perfect at handling my work. I wonder what she's doing now. Mike often compared me to women from his past, and every time he did, I'd ask, why would you say something like that? I'm trying my hardest too. But his response would always be defensive. Who do you think you are? Who do you think I am, leaving me feeling upset and dismissed? Honestly, it was disheartening and deeply saddening. Still, on his good days, Mike was as kind and fun as he used to be, which made those days enjoyable. Thus, I tried my best not to provoke him, aiming to be the ideal woman he wanted. I believe I was suffering from Cassandra syndrome at that time. The psychological state of Cassandra syndrome is something only those who have experienced it can understand. Being with Mike was like toggling between heaven and hell. Experiencing hell should be unbearably painful, yet knowing what heaven is like leads to self-sacrifice in an attempt to get closer to it. And despite understanding the inhuman behavior of the other person, one might end up believing they themselves are partly to blame. Our age difference of 8 years might have easily led to this dynamic. However, it was impossible to avoid stepping on landmines, especially when Mike's moodiness often stemmed from things outside the home. Keeping up this unbalanced relationship for years, I planned to return to being an office worker once our children started daycare. Hey, Mike. I was thinking it might be time for me to go back to work. Work? What are you planning to do? I thought I'd go back to being an office worker. What are you talking about? People will think my business isn't doing well if you start working. It's common sense for the wife of an entrepreneur to bring in new business or build connections to increase the company's profits. Yeah, you're right. Considering your position. I found myself agreeing with Mike, and from then on, I became deeply involved in his business. Initially, I was happy to be spending time with Mike, but his emotional abuse worsened. Unable to vent his frustration on employees, he began to openly take it out on me in front of them. What the hell? Take responsibility for me. But enough with your buts. You're useless at home and work. You're really worthless. Hey, Mike. That's a bit too much to say. Even when an employee intervened on my behalf, I felt humiliated by the situation. It's okay. Being a business owner can be very stressful. Letting him vent is part of my job, after all. Though I answered cheerfully to the employees, inside, I was holding back tears, hiding my frustration and sadness. Gradually, the remarks that undermined my personality increased. But, for better or worse, working together built up my immunity to verbal abuse, and I slowly started to emerge from the shadow of Cassandra syndrome. I became adept at avoiding Mike's emotional abuse, coming to see his outbursts as nothing more than an animal barking. However, my love for him cooled in proportion to my growing indifference. The reason I didn't choose divorce was because of our daughters. As time passed and the girls entered junior high school, their individual personalities began to emerge. My first daughter is smart and academically excellent, making her the top of her school. She had a cheerful and mischievous nature, quickly becoming Mike's favorite. On the other hand, my second daughter struggled with schoolwork in the conventional sense. Except for physical education, her grades were the opposite of her sister's. She was a tomboy, often running around the house, jumping off tables, and kicking balls. Because of this, she often broke Mike's expensive whiskey collection, knocked over the TV, and damaged other things, which frequently led to Mike scolding her. "Scarlett excels in her grades, but why do you always make me angry?" "I'm sorry." Right after apologizing, the younger daughter would start running around the house again, causing both Mike and me quite a bit of trouble. However, I valued each of their unique personalities and made it a point to only scold them for dangerous behaviors or breaking things. But to the perfectionist Mike, my second daughter seemed to become an unwanted presence. When in a bad mood, he would ignore her and always take my first daughter with him when he went out. For birthdays, while Scarlett got expensive gifts she wanted, Amy received only a bubble wand. It was obvious to anyone that he was favoring Scarlett. "Why does Scarlett get nice clothes, and I only get a bubble wand?" Amy challenged Mike, but that only angered him further. "There's no reward for someone with poor grades who constantly breaks things at home. If you want something nice, be the top of your class like Scarlett." Though Mike had a point, it didn't align with my approach to parenting. Eventually, Amy began to feel hated by her father and started ignoring his words. Mike, provoked by this defiance, often resorted to emotional abuse towards her as well. One day, she accidentally broke another one of his cherished whiskey bottles. At the peak of his anger, Mike shouted at Amy, "You're a defective piece of junk, just like your mother. I don't need a daughter like this." Then he turned to me, "Hey, Nancy. Could it be that she has a different father?" "That must be it." "What nonsense are you talking about? Amy is undoubtedly your daughter, Mike. If she were my child, she wouldn't have turned out like this. You must have been unfaithful." I felt as if my veins were about to burst with anger. I urged my daughters to go to their room, and once they were inside, I unleashed my pent-up frustration on Mike. "Enough already. Do you think it's okay to say such things to our daughter? You've been ignoring me and Amy without a second thought, saying horrible things. Don't you feel even a bit of remorse for behaving so badly as a person, as a man? That's because you and she are useless trash." "That's exactly what I'm talking about. How would you feel if someone called you useless or trash? What's wrong with stating the truth? I'm actually doing you a favor, so you don't embarrass yourselves in public. Plus, I'm successful, so no one dares say such things to me." "Then let me say it." At that moment, all my restraint vanished. "You're an abuser. A human piece of trash. A psychopath. Get out." With that, Mike grabbed his car keys and left the house. Immediately after, I started packing, intending to leave for good. The children were already asleep, so I planned to leave the next morning. The next day was Saturday. After breakfast, I explained the situation to my daughters. They both cried, and Scarlett said to Amy, "Amy, I'm sorry. I knew something was wrong too. I felt guilty for being the only one treated well, but I was too scared to say anything because of Dad." "You did nothing wrong." While we were talking, Mike returned home. He brought a young woman in her early 20s with him in the passenger seat. Besides our usual family car, he also owned several sports cars. Among them, his favorite was a Porsche. He had left in the Porsche yesterday, and now he was back with a woman next to him. At that moment, I understood what it meant. But I no longer cared. They entered the house, all smiles and chatting. Seeing the packed bags at the entrance, Mike snorted but then said, "Hey, Nancy. You don't have to run away after all." "What? I want to divorce you. And to think you'd say that after bringing another woman home." "What? What are you talking about? Once I'm divorced from you, I'm gonna marry her." "Huh? I'll give you the house right from the start to avoid any hassle." "What?" Not only was I stunned, but so were our daughters. "Come on, Scarlett, we're leaving." "Wait! Where do you think you're taking Scarlett?" "She's gonna live with us." "What? That's ridiculous. I won't let you take either of them. You think a young woman like her can raise my daughters?" "She's close in age to them, more like a sister than a mother. I'll do my best as a new mom." "How far gone is he, really? You're forgetting something important. Do you think you can support 2 kids through high school with your income alone? And you want Scarlett to go to college, right? Having a house is the least of your worries." He had a point. Though I had worked for Mike's company, I hadn't been paid in personal funds. I was only credited with living expenses as my salary, leaving me without any savings. Returning to a regular job wouldn't cover college for the kids. For Scarlett's sake, letting her go with her father seemed the only option. "I'm sorry, Scarlett. Staying with me might not allow you to reach your full potential. But we'll talk every day." "All right. I'll be fine. Mom, please take care of Amy." Scarlett responded with strength. After they left, Amy cried again. "Mom, I'm sorry. It's all my fault that we're separated from Scarlett." "Amy, listen. This is not your fault at all. It's all because of your father's character. You don't have to worry about anything." "But Dad said I'm a defective product like Mom. He made fun of us. I can't do well in studies or anything. I might just be a burden." "What are you talking about? You are a masterpiece. You have a richness of sensitivity that ordinary people don't have." At the time, Amy might not have fully grasped what rich in sensitivity meant, but I understood that, although she might not excel academically, she possessed a unique sensibility that others lacked. From then on, without any interference from Mike and being freed from the emotional abuse, we gradually regained our true smiles. Although not being able to see Scarlett often was painful, we were able to live our days in peace. 12 years had passed, and Amy was now 25 years old. Having grown into a fine adult, she was captivated by a movie she saw in high school and now worked in the film industry. As for me, to prove Mike wrong, I started my own business shortly after our divorce. Using my accumulated know-how, I established a food import and distribution company. A few years later, to utilize Amy's talent, we started a small film production company together. By the time our company had grown to employ 2,000 people, my younger daughter took on her first challenge as a director. When Amy's film was shown in a single theater for the first time, my company became listed. Around that time, a TV program decided to feature us under the title "The Story of an Up-and-Coming Film Director and Her Mother." A few days after our story aired on TV, a surprising visitor came to our company. "Mr. Richardson is here to see you." "Richardson?" "Yes, he wants to give flowers to Amy." "Okay, let him in." "All right." "Hey, long time no see. You look well." The visitor was my ex-husband, Mike, holding a large purple Phalaenopsis orchid. "You've become quite impressive. I heard Amy made a movie? I don't know much about films, but isn't she amazing? This is a congratulatory gift for Amy. Is she here at the company? Whether she's here or not, it's none of your business. I don't plan to let you see her, and I doubt Amy wants to see you. Come on, don't be so cold. Can't you at least ask her?" After that TV program, I bragged to everyone that my daughter has become a famous film director. How convenient for you. After everything you said to Amy, have you forgotten? You called her trash, a defective product. Do you realize how much that hurt her? I regret that, okay? I never imagined Amy had such talent. Neither did you, right? If I had known, I wouldn't have said those things to her. You haven't changed. Whether Amy and I succeed or not, we are who we are. Our worth isn't determined by status or public opinion. What's with the attitude? Anyway, I have no intention of letting you see Amy. It's not the flower's fault, but please take your orchid and leave. You're so cold. But I came here today because I had something to discuss with you. Wishing Amy well was just a side note. What? You want the house back? No, it's not about the house. Calm down. This could be a good opportunity for you, so just listen to what I have to say. Intrigued, I decided to hear Mike out. Actually, I've been thinking about starting a new business. He wanted to discuss his plans to open a glamping facility. True to his nature, his proposal was well prepared. This glamping facility, don't you think it would be impressive if it comes to fruition? But to build something of this scale, the funding would exceed $1 million, wouldn't it? I can't take that risk alone. So, how about we both pitch in half and co-manage it? Think of it as our child, since we couldn't raise our children together. Why not try this challenge together, just once? Mike's proposal about the glamping facility, as he said, wasn't a bad idea. But that was always Mike's way. He judged people based on whether he could use them or not. 12 years ago, Amy and I were deemed unnecessary by him. Yet, seeing our success, he likely thought to take advantage of us. However, I was aware of Mike's substantial debt. According to what I heard from Scarlett, his business hadn't been doing well for about 5 years, leading to the closure of all 3 of his restaurants due to staff shortages. Additionally, his main car dealership also saw a decline in sales as younger generations became less interested in owning cars, with revenues having from their peak. Despite this, Mike, unable to let go of his pride, took a loan of $30 million from a bank in a bid to begin his new business, which also failed. It seemed he was left with a significant amount of debt. Sure, it's a good proposal. But, do you have the money? What? You have debts, right? How do you plan to secure a loan from the bank? How do you know about that? I heard it from Scarlett. You said the same thing to her husband, didn't you? Scarlett said that? After graduating, Scarlett joined the development department of a major company. Then, she met and married the son of a CEO from one of their business partners. She's currently focusing on raising her children. Mike had apparently pitched this business idea to Scarlett's husband too. Normally, pitching a business idea to your daughter's in-laws would be considered quite inappropriate. But Mike doesn't see that. Because he operates on the principle of using whatever and whoever he can. This made Scarlett furious. I'm truly grateful for the education, but Dad, you're a bit off the norm. Don't drag my family into this, she had said, keeping her distance from him. Maybe you're planning to use my money to start the glamping site and then run it while paying off the loan? What? His reaction confirmed my suspicion. After all, having worked together for more than 10 years, I was well acquainted with Mike's way of doing business. Well, it sounds interesting, so I might take you up on that offer. But if I'm investing 100%, it's not a joint venture. Let's call it a service fee, and you'll get 30% of the profits. What a nasty woman! Try to be a bit more charming. That's why you can't find someone to remarry. Actually, I'm already remarried. I just kept my maiden name, Overton, because I started the company afterwards. Huh? There was someone else who fell for you besides me. So, what will you do? Will you take my offer? I'll think about it. Don't say you can do it if you can't from the start. Oh, where have I heard that before? I never heard from Mike again after that. In the end, he probably couldn't let go of his pride to ask for help, especially after being mocked by me. Afterward, it seems his business deteriorated to the point where he had to declare bankruptcy. It appears he hadn't told his new wife about his failing business, but following this incident, she seems to have left him. No one knows where he is now. Unable to let go of his pride and pretense, he moved to a place where no one knew him and was living off day jobs. It seems loneliness suits an abuser like him. Damn wife! I told you not to call me at work unless it's important. On the other end of the phone, my husband yelled in annoyance, causing me to catch my breath for a moment. Right now, he's on an overnight business trip. He's busy with sales and has repeatedly told me how crucial this job is and to never disturb him. So, I wouldn't keep contacting him unless it was something important. To think that the first thing he said after I finally got through to him was this. I'm so angry I could boil over, being dismissed without even being heard, assuming it's nothing important. It is important. Actually, your mom. Shut up. If mom needed something, she'd contact me directly. If you're the one calling, it can't be that important, it's trivial. I'm hanging up now. This is why women are so. He deliberately interrupted me loudly and hung up the phone, still grumbling. Unknowingly, I exhaled deeply. Yet, my heart wouldn't settle down. I gripped my phone, took several deep breaths, and finally calmed down a bit. I stared at the email screen for a while, then slowly closed my eyes. I wonder if he's never heard of the phrase dead men tell no tales. The email from my brother-in-law unmistakably informed me of my mother-in-law's passing. My name is Regina. I'm a 32-year-old freelance web designer. I worked hard in my company during my 20s and finally went independent. Now, I work from home while living with my husband. My husband's name is Kenneth. We met through a client I was working for at the time. We got along well and eventually, without any issues, started dating and got married. Kenneth was gentle and calm during our dating period, but once we got married, his attitude became increasingly cold. Even when I tried to have a conversation, all he would say was, "I'm tired." And then he'd just blankly watch TV, ignoring me, or on his bad days, he would say, "You're lucky, working from home at your own pace." At the office, no matter how much I dislike it, I have to talk to bosses and clients. I envy you. You should at least make some effort in cooking since you have it easy. Indeed, working from home allows me to avoid office politics and work in peace, but it's unstable as I only get paid based on output. There's always anxiety and pressure, it's tough. The atmosphere between us grew increasingly tense. I was anxious about our future life. There was a time when we even tried to have children. I hoped that having a child might make Kenneth more aware of his role as a father and perhaps mellow him a bit, and I wanted to have children before I got much older. However, that dream never came true. I did get pregnant once. It was a joyous occasion, but before even reaching the 6-month mark, I had a miscarriage. I still can't forget the pain from that time. The guilt of not being able to bear our child. Though still a fetus, the loss of a precious life left me with an unbearable sadness. At times like this, I couldn't focus on work and spent every day crying and cooped up. The baby probably thought it was better to die than stay in your uncomfortable belly. Instead of showing any concern, my husband mocked me as I lay bedridden, looking down on me with disdain. Man, gotta start all over again. What a drag. Seriously, can you even get pregnant still? His words were so lacking in delicacy that they wounded me deeply, shattering my heart even more. What saved me from rock bottom was my mother-in-law. Ever since we got married, I had a good relationship with her. She would come over to our house or exchange messages with me. We shared tips about recipes and cosmetics, maintaining a friendship-like relationship, albeit with some care. When she learned about my miscarriage, she grieved with me as if it were her own sorrow. When my husband blurted out in her presence, "What a defective product. Can't a woman even properly bear a child?" she exploded, grabbed him by the collar, and commanded, "Kenneth, what are you saying? Blaming your wife for a miscarriage is unbelievable. Regina did nothing wrong. Sometimes, it's just a whim of God." Not learning that, but only learning twisted character and how to speak nastily. I didn't raise you to be such a son. Seeing her defend me while my heart was being worn down by my husband's attitude somehow lifted my spirits. I felt deep gratitude and affection for the mother-in-law who stood up for me. When we were alone, she shared that she too had experienced a miscarriage before conceiving Kenneth. It had happened before she became pregnant with Kenneth. There was indeed a baby here, and I couldn't bear it. I was so sad and frustrated, I blamed myself. Back then, medicine wasn't as advanced, and the causes weren't clear. They even said it might be the mother's fault. I was harshly blamed by my mother-in-law. I really wanted to tell you it's not your fault. While holding my hands, her words pained me, and my heart felt tightly squeezed. I thought about ending it with the baby I couldn't bear, many times. Don't say that. I blurted out as she smiled gently. It's okay. I'm alive now, and after that, I even had 2 more children after Kenneth. So, it'll be fine. You'll surely be able to bear your next child. But I know it's hard right now. You can vent to me. We can just chat to distract you. His dad's been gone for a few years, and I have all the time in the world, so call me anytime. Tears welled up in my eyes at her warm, loving words. Before I knew it, I was clinging to my mother-in-law, tears streaming down my face. Since then, my relationship with my mother-in-law deepened, perhaps stronger than even real family. However, my husband remained cold as ever. Even as I recovered and resumed my normal work and household tasks, his indifferent attitude persisted. There were no more abusive words, but no pleasant conversations either. At home, his typical remarks were like commands to a servant, "I'm tired. Isn't there any dinner?" Or after eating, "I have an entertaining meeting the day after tomorrow, prepare some gifts," without bothering to clear the table. Otherwise, he mostly ignored me, treating me like I was just part of the background. I wondered if there was any point in continuing such a loveless marriage. On the other hand, I continued my relationship with my mother-in-law, exchanging messages and meeting a few times a month for tea or shopping. I was afraid to lose this relationship if I divorced Kenneth. Moreover, the money Kenneth brought home was diminishing. Despite supposedly earning well in sales, he only provided the bare minimum for living expenses. "You earn too, so this should be enough to live on, right?" He decided unilaterally without leaving room for discussion. Almost as if saying, "I'm giving you money, so no complaints." There was no sudden lavish spending or signs of an affair. Like lipstick on his shirts or business cards from nightclubs. He just kept saying work was busier, with more demanding clients, increasing his business trips and time away from home. It was strange that he didn't suggest divorce despite treating me as if I were heir. As I adjusted to this frugal lifestyle over a few months and continued to work hard, my previous efforts began to be recognized, and more work came my way. Rates from longtime clients increased, and new projects kept coming through referrals. As my workload increased, my job began to take off. Naturally, my earnings increased, and if I kept up this pace, I might manage to save some money even with the minimal financial support from my husband. One day, though, something happened. "What, another business trip? You just went last week." I was surprised when my husband, who had just been on a trip a few days ago, said he was leaving again for 3 days and 2 nights. It seemed excessively frequent. While business trips are common in sales, I hadn't heard anything about him changing departments since we got married. Such a sudden, significant change in his environment seemed unnatural. "That's what I've been telling you. I have these annoying clients who summon me to the countryside. Unlike you, who just clicks around online, I earn my keep on my feet." He snapped at me, then threw an empty suitcase in front of me, signaling me to get ready. Why do I have to endure this? These thoughts crushed my heart as I silently looked down at the suitcase. Without showing any interest in me, my husband carelessly finished his dinner and shower and went to sleep. Even as I approached the bed, he snored loudly, showing no sign of waking. His phone was right in front of me. I could easily peek inside if I used his finger for the fingerprint authentication. But if I found definitive proof, it would certainly lead to divorce. I would have to explain it to my mother-in-law. If I divorced, I doubted we could continue our relationship as before. But maybe, if I confided in her, she might scold him, saying, "It's my son's fault," and we could continue our relationship not as mother-in-law and daughter-in-law but just as friends. As I was about to use his finger to unlock his phone, the screen suddenly lit up. A message notification appeared, clearly from a woman, displaying her name. "Looking forward to the weekend. Last week I went shopping, so this time, let's relax in the hotel and get cozy." Strangely, I felt no anger. Rather, I was almost happy that I had evidence to get a divorce from my husband. Seeing my chance as he slept deeply from drinking, I unlocked his phone and launched the messaging app. I quickly took a screenshot with my phone and scrolled slowly. I recorded a video of all their messages since the start of their affair. There were photos shot on the bed, and I struggled to steady my trembling hands. Then, I verified whether his overnight stays were for business or to meet this woman. It turned out not all were lies. Occasionally, he really was on business trips. Gathering evidence was eerily easy. As if he had no intention of hiding his affair, which made my head spin. Even the next morning, he seemed to notice nothing unusual. He sat down for breakfast as usual, complained about the seasoning, belittled my work, and grumbled about how hard his life was. As I watched his back while he left through the front door, my heart remained strangely calm. I wondered if I should look for a lawyer. Perhaps because I said nothing, my husband seemed in a slightly better mood. That weekend, he unusually left with just a "I'll be back," heading out on what was supposed to be a business trip but was actually an affair getaway. As I was tidying up the house and considering going shopping for dinner, I pondered my next steps. I received an unusual call on my phone. Kenneth has a brother and a sister. The call was from Kenneth's brother. My brother-in-law is married but lives with his parents to save money for a house. "Hello?" When I answered the phone, I heard his voice, sounding more subdued than when we last met. "Regina, I'm sorry to call out of the blue, but my mother suddenly passed away."
"What? No. It must be some mistake."
I cried out almost like a scream. Images of my mother-in-law, with whom I had spent so much time, flashed through my mind. Her smiling face when we had coffee together. Her serious expression when she was giving me advice. And her warm expression when she supported me during my miscarriage. The sudden news of her passing felt like a stab in the heart. "It's true. She collapsed suddenly this morning, and we called an ambulance, but she was gone. I'm sorry, is Kenneth there? I can't seem to reach him." I hesitated for a moment. I was tempted to spill everything to my brother-in-law right then, but it wasn't the right time. Now was not the moment to tell him. "I'm sorry, he's not here. He's on a business trip. I think it's tough for you too. Shall I handle it?" "Okay, could you please do that? Honestly, I'm overwhelmed with everything that needs to be done." After offering my condolences again and telling him I'd help if needed, I ended the call. Then I immediately tried to contact Kenneth. My heart ached with the pain of losing the mother-in-law I was close to, and I fretted over my husband not answering the phone. After ringing more than 10 times, Kenneth finally picked up, sounding clearly annoyed. "Hello? I'm glad you finally answered. Actually, your mom." As I tried to speak, Kenneth cut me off.
"Huh? What about Mom? Didn't I tell you I'm on a business trip? Don't call me with trivial stuff."
I was momentarily breathless. He was irritated to be called by his wife during his affair trip. Knowing this only fueled my anger.
"Come home right now. This morning, your mom." "Shut up."
His anger flared as I insisted on speaking, and he yelled, cutting me off.
"If it was really important, Mom would have contacted me directly. If not, it's nothing serious. I'm at work, don't call me, you shut in."
With that, Kenneth ranted in a harsh tone and hung up unilaterally. I stood shocked and trembling, holding my phone, confused. He wouldn't even listen. It was about his mother. I tried calling several more times, but either the phone was off or out of service. I felt hopeless. I took a deep breath. If you really don't want to talk to me that much, then I'll just stop calling. It was his own words after all, he shouldn't have any complaints about it later. Then I left a note on the dining room table that simply read, "I'm going to your parents' house," quickly packed my bags, and left the house. By the time I arrived at my in-laws, it was already evening. In the midst of the chaos, Kenneth's brother and sister greeted me. On the living room table, there was a to-do list left for the family, with papers scattered everywhere. "I'm sorry. There's still so much to do. I haven't managed to get everything organized. No, I'm sorry for coming alone at such a time." "It's okay, but what about Kenneth? Is he coming later?" It seemed they expected us both, but my brother-in-law looked puzzled seeing me alone. My sister-in-law also seemed surprised, peering outside to see if Kenneth's car was there, which made me feel guilty. I steeled myself and relayed the conversation I had with Kenneth a few hours earlier. After a painfully long silence, my sister-in-law was the first to speak.
"I can't believe it. He really said that. What is he thinking?"
She seemed to be trying to control her anger, her fists trembling and her face flushed red.
"That jerk. Damn, should I try to contact him right now?"
My brother-in-law muttered in a dangerously low voice. Looking closely at the memo my brother-in-law was fiddling with, I noticed it listed the funeral home's name and the number of people to call. Next to the word chief mourner was Kenneth's name there. Noticing my gaze, my brother-in-law quickly dropped the memo.
"The funeral home thought Kenneth would be the main organizer. I'll call them now." "Right, we need to update them as soon as we know."
My brother-in-law immediately contacted the funeral home. I stayed the night there. The next morning, my brother-in-law was busy with paperwork like the death certificate. I recontacted relatives who had not been reached the previous day, informing them of my mother-in-law's death, and focused all my energy on preparing for the wake. Despite the sudden notice, many people came to see my mother-in-law at the wake. Every time, I had to explain that Kenneth was on an important business trip and couldn't get away. Some people were astonished, others angry, and some even tried to contact him on the spot. However, either his phone was off or he was not responding to any calls. After an exhausting night, I collapsed into sleep. The funeral began the next day, and I managed to see my mother-in-law off. But during the final farewell, I couldn't hold back my tears as I remembered her gentle face. I cried openly, hugging my sister-in-law, mourning the loss together.
A mother-in-law like this who is so loved by her daughter-in-law is rare. I'm sure Mom was happy to have gotten along with you, Regina.
My brother-in-law consoled me. The three of us returned to my in-laws' house, shared memories of my mother-in-law, and shed tears together. There was still no contact from Kenneth. In the following days, we managed the funeral expenses and entertained friends of my mother-in-law who visited the house, living through hectic days. Before I knew it, 3 days had passed when suddenly the front door of the in-laws' house was violently flung open. The heavy footsteps stomped in, and it was Kenneth who burst into the living room.
"As long as you're squatting in someone else's house, shut in. You left everything at home and just what have you been doing?"
Kenneth started yelling the moment he saw me, but then he noticed his brother and sister with raised eyebrows. He seemed to calm down momentarily, looking around the tidy and chair-filled living room, his head tilting in confusion.
"What's this, guests? And where's Mom?"
"I'm thirsty." At his words, my sister-in-law quietly stood up. But quicker than her, his brother rushed up to Kenneth and punched him right in the face. Kenneth screamed as he fell backwards with a loud thud. Mounting him, his brother grabbed Kenneth by the shirt.
"Mom's dead. The wake and funeral are already over, and you have the nerve to show up now?"
The usually quiet and polite brother-in-law had completely flipped. His face turned red with fury as he spat out his words, and Kenneth, seemingly forgetting the pain on his cheek, looked utterly foolish. Gradually, as the meaning of the words sank in, Kenneth's face turned as red with anger as his brother's, and he shouted back.
I didn't hear anything about this. Why didn't anyone tell me something this important? We did. I did and Regina did. Even relatives called you crazy.
Kenneth choked up, looking away, unable to respond. I don't know when Kenneth had turned his phone back on, but combined, the calls from everyone about my mother-in-law's death must have easily surpassed 50. Pretending he hadn't seen them was hardly an option now. Yet still unwilling to admit his fault, Kenneth glared at me.
It's your fault for not getting to the point sooner. If you had told me clearly about Mom, I would have come right back. It's you who didn't even want to listen, right?
My sister-in-law's cold voice cut through Kenneth's shouts. Unlike my still trembling brother-in-law, she looked at Kenneth with undisguised contempt.
You guys think she would lie about this?
That's impossible.
Because I recorded our call that time.
Do you want to hear it too? As I showed my phone to him, Kenneth's eyes widened. Indeed, I had set my phone to automatically record all calls. Unlike my online consultations where incoming calls often involved minor amendments and additions that could easily lead to disputes later. This feature, useful for tracking assertive salespeople and their affiliations, was something I cherished. Naturally, the conversations with Kenneth were also recorded, and I had already let my brother-in-law and sister-in-law listen to these recordings. As my sister-in-law glared at Kenneth with wide eyes, she added,
Kenneth, you're lying. I heard at the company there's no business trip. It seems like you've been continuously on leave. What? You checked up on me at the company?
Yes. She worked at the same company and, harboring suspicions, had inquired about his department.
Well, of course, I was worried. You're too busy to even come to Mom's funeral. Or is there something you're worried might come out if someone digs too deep?
Silence fell, then my brother-in-law, looking pale, raised his head and gave Kenneth a severe look.
So, what have you been doing all this time you took leave?
Kenneth brazenly shouted back.
What do you mean, what? Work, work. There are entertainments I have to attend even if I'm on leave. You wouldn't understand.
While Kenneth shouted, I turned on my phone. It contained evidence of his affair I had collected earlier.
It was a trip with your mistress, wasn't it?
I said this as I showed the phone to Kenneth's brother and sister.
What are you talking about? Stop making things up.
Ignoring his flustered shouts, I showed them the images of messages exchanged between him and his girlfriend, and receipts from a brand shop for gifts he had likely bought her. There were also photos of them arm in arm. Anyone could understand the situation from these images. I could even show the messages they had exchanged right before this trip.
What is this? I can't believe it. You neglected Mom for a trip with this woman? And these messages are so cheesy, it's disgusting.
His sister immediately expressed her disgust. His brother, unable to fully grasp the situation, turned a pale face towards Kenneth.
It's not just about the trip, but this is a betrayal to Regina. And spending so much on gifts for her really hits the family finances hard.
For his brother, who was actively saving money, the financial issues were particularly pressing. Kenneth had been contributing almost nothing at home, instead spending it on his mistress, which was unforgivable to him.
Wait a minute, what are you looking at?
In a rage, Kenneth snatched the phone from us. After looking through it, he confronted me. When did you get this? You snooped on my messages with her, huh? After Kenneth's brother managed to restrain Kenneth from roughly grabbing my clothes, Kenneth, in a fit of irritation, violently threw my phone onto the floor. The loud crash painfully echoed in the tense room.
I didn't want to do this. But you were obviously suspicious. Constantly away on business trips and barely coming home. Hardly putting any money into the house. All you ever have for me are words without a shred of compassion. I just knew something was up.
I retorted fiercely as I picked up my phone.
Then I happened to see messages from her. More evidence just came out easily from the bedroom. You're terrible at hiding it. I was astounded, being on the receiving end of the affair.
At that, Kenneth lost it.
Shut up. Having a wife and a home, Doing well at work and earning money, women just flock to you. In the world of men, that's also a mark of reputation. Or would you rather have a husband who can't get anywhere, huh?
I looked down, not out of hurt, but because I couldn't help but laugh at his ridiculous justification. I managed to compose myself, took a deep breath, and delivered my final words to him.
You only get to talk like that when you've actually taken care of your family. You have no right to speak of responsibility. Don't ever come back to our house again.
Eventually, soon after, Kenneth was cut ties by both his brother and sister. Mishandling his marriage and indulging in an affair without remorse, and showing no compassion towards his deceased mother was enough reason for them to sever ties. I cleared out all of Kenneth's belongings from our home and started enjoying my life alone. And of course, I took proper steps regarding the divorce by consulting with a lawyer. Turns out, the mistress was a woman from a company he did business with, and after his sister identified her from the evidence photos, it was quickly confirmed. Utterly disgusting.
This woman is no better. We need to think about who we associate with,
his sister said while sharing the mistress's information she found on social media with me. Once the divorce process started, my phone started blowing up with frantic messages from him. Come on, give me a break. After being kicked out by my own family, I had to rent a cheap place, but I can't live like this. Kenneth complained, showing no understanding of his own misdeeds, which left me dumbfounded. I immediately blocked his number. A few days later, he started showing up at my house directly. When I opened the door, there stood Kenneth, noticeably more disheveled than before.
What are you doing here? I told you never to come back,
I said, pushing him away. He smirked unpleasantly and replied, all right, I won't come in, but at least sort out the money thing. The alimony is too high, and I barely have enough to get by. I can't even afford a new suit. This is a big problem for a top salesman like me. Come on, can't you let it slide? He was shamelessly begging for money.
You should get supported by the girlfriend you went on trips with.
Biting his lip in frustration, Kenneth frowned.
She dumped me. She got furious when she found out what happened, and it led to a breakup.
So, Kenneth, once a money source for his girlfriend, had turned into a financial burden, and she dumped him. He had lavished her with expensive brands and luxury trips, and it turned out she was just with him for his money, a shallow woman indeed. Oh, really? But you're such an accomplished person at your company, unlike me, right? If that's the case, you should be able to take care of yourself. Goodbye then, I said and slammed the door shut. I quickly contacted my lawyer, and soon, a restraining order was issued against Kenneth. He had wasted the money he made on his mistress and frivolities, neglecting home responsibilities, and now, living at a tiny price, he couldn't even manage basic household tasks. His disheveled appearance when he showed up was just a testament to his lack of life skills. Unsurprisingly, he couldn't maintain his job as a salesperson, and unable to cook, he constantly ate junk food and his health deteriorated, leading to his dismissal a few months later. As I heard from his sister who worked at the same company. With no good job prospects and unable to land a stable position, he found himself in a dire situation. However, he needs to get my life back on track. A few months later, I heard from Kenneth's sister that she saw him working as a traffic control, looking unwell, on a road he had passed during a business trip. After all his condescending and selfish behavior, it seems Kenneth ended up continuing with a job that allowed him no freedom. The mistress's parents were furious about her having an affair with a married man and indulging in luxuries. All the shopping and travel she had enjoyed are now forbidden, and under her parents' strict supervision, she has to go to work. She is forced to live a suffocating life with no freedom in her job or personal life, carrying daily stress as she works. After that, I used my savings to move to a new condo quickly. The current condo also had memories of living with Kenneth, and just being there brought back unpleasant memories. I wanted to leave that place as soon as possible. My workload has continued to increase, and I have been able to build a good track record while gaining trust from several clients. I'm living a fulfilling single life, focused on my work. With a fresh start, I began a new life. A few months later, I started dating a man I met at a cafe in my new town. He works in corporate planning at a major company and has shown great interest and respect for my job as a web designer. I was attracted to his calm, logical, and composed nature. I'm sure he would never blatantly cheat or brazenly betray his family. Years later, I married him, and we were also blessed with children. This time, no complications arose, and the baby in my belly is growing healthily. My new husband has been very caring during my pregnancy, which has greatly helped. Now, we are both eagerly awaiting the birth of our child as we continue working and preparing. A kind husband and another family member who will soon be born. A peaceful and loving home